There is something strange that happens when you finally stop running after someone. Not because you stopped caring, not because you suddenly became cold, but because something inside you quietly changed. You became tired of proving your worth, tired of explaining yourself, tired of chasing affection that should never have required pursuit in the first place. And that's the moment most people never expect, because while you were busy trying to hold on, they felt powerful. They felt secure. They assumed you would always return. They assumed your attention was permanent. They assumed your love had no limits. But the moment you stopped chasing, something shifted. Suddenly, the silence became louder than your words ever were. Suddenly, the distance they once created began to feel uncomfortable. Suddenly, they started noticing the very absence they once ignored. And what happens next is something few people understand. Because when a person realizes they no longer control your emotions, their behavior begins to change in ways that reveal who they truly are. And by the end of this video, you may discover that the greatest transformation in your life began the moment you stopped chasing. Most people believe that love is proven through effort. They think the harder they pursue, the more valuable they become. They convince themselves that if they just try harder, speak softer, forgive more, or sacrifice a little longer, eventually they will receive the affection they desire. But human psychology rarely works that way. In fact, people often fail to appreciate what constantly makes itself available, not because they are evil, not because they intentionally want to hurt you, but because familiarity creates blindness. When someone becomes certain that you will always be there, they stop paying attention. And this is where so many people lose themselves. They become experts at understanding everyone else's emotions while abandoning their own. They know how to comfort others, forgive others, and fight for others. Yet they never ask one important question: who is fighting for me? And perhaps you've experienced this. Maybe you were always the one sending the message first, always apologizing, always fixing arguments, always making excuses for someone who gave you half the effort you offered them. You convinced yourself that patience was love. You convinced yourself that sacrifice was loyalty. But deep inside, something felt wrong, because love should never feel like begging. And eventually, a day arrives when exhaustion becomes stronger than hope. Not anger, not revenge, just exhaustion. You stop forcing conversations. You stop seeking validation. You stop trying to convince someone to choose you. And strangely enough, that's when they begin to notice. Because people often realize your value only when your energy disappears. Think about it. As long as you kept chasing, they never had to wonder. They never had to question your feelings. They never experienced uncertainty. You removed every mystery, but the moment you stepped back, something changed inside them. Now they wonder. Now they notice the empty space. Now they feel the silence. And human beings are deeply affected by absence, because absence creates awareness. What was once invisible suddenly becomes important. What was once taken for granted suddenly becomes precious. This is why many people return only after they sense they are losing access to you. Not necessarily because they changed, not necessarily because they suddenly understood love. Sometimes they simply react to the discomfort of losing certainty. And this is where things become interesting. Because when someone realizes you stopped chasing, there are several responses they may have. The first response is confusion. At first, they don't believe it. They think you're upset. They assume you'll come back tomorrow. They expect another message, another apology, another attempt to reconnect. After all, that's what you've always done. But days pass, and something feels different. Your energy is gone. Your desperation is gone. And suddenly they begin asking themselves questions they never asked before. Why aren't they calling? Why aren't they fighting? Why are they so calm? And this confusion becomes powerful because uncertainty creates emotional tension. Human beings naturally seek answers, and when they cannot find them, their mind starts filling the silence with possibilities. Maybe they moved on, maybe they changed, maybe I lost them. And ironically, the very person who once had all the certainty now experiences the anxiety you carried for so long. This is not punishment, this is psychology, because people rarely understand your importance while they are accustomed to your presence. But once that presence disappears, the mind begins comparing life with you to life without you. And comparison creates awareness. The second response they may experience is curiosity. Curiosity is one of the strongest emotional forces in human nature. People become obsessed with understanding what they no longer control. They start checking your social media. They wonder who you're talking to. They wonder whether someone else has entered your life. They wonder why you suddenly seem peaceful, because peace is attractive. Confidence is attractive, and nothing confuses people more than seeing someone they expected to break become stronger instead. This is why your silence often speaks louder than your explanations ever did, because explanations can be ignored, arguments can be dismissed, but absence cannot be debated. Silence forces people to confront themselves. And sometimes that's exactly what they fear, because as long as you chased them, they never had to examine their own behavior. They could blame you, they could criticize you, they could avoid responsibility, but once you stopped, they were left alone with their own reflection. And reflections are uncomfortable, because eventually every person must answer one question. Did I appreciate someone who genuinely cared about me? Or did I lose them because I assumed they would never leave? And that answer can haunt a person far longer than any argument ever could, because regret is born from realization, not during possession, but during loss. And perhaps this explains why so many people return after months or even years, not because time magically changed them, but because distance finally revealed what closeness had hidden. And yet, there is something even more important: what happens inside you. Because while they are beginning to question your absence, you are beginning to rediscover yourself, and that may be the greatest shift of all. For the first time in a long time, your happiness no longer depends on someone else's response. For the first time, you begin listening to your own needs. For the first time, you understand something that changes everything. You were never asking for too much. You were simply asking the wrong person. And once this realization enters your mind, an entirely new chapter begins. A chapter that many people never reach because they spend their entire lives chasing those who were never running toward them. Most people think the hardest thing in life is losing someone, but that isn't entirely true. Sometimes the hardest thing is realizing how much of yourself you lost while trying to keep someone else. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what made you happy. You stopped paying attention to your own dreams. You stopped listening to that quiet voice inside you that kept whispering that something wasn't right. And perhaps the most painful part wasn't what they did. It was what you tolerated. Because when love becomes one-sided, people slowly begin accepting things they once promised themselves they would never accept. Little disappointments become normal. Broken promises become expected. Being ignored becomes routine. And without realizing it, you start calling survival love. But something remarkable happens when you stop chasing. You begin to see clearly, and clarity changes everything. Suddenly, you notice how often you were carrying the entire relationship on your shoulders. You notice how many conversations would have died if you hadn't revived them. You notice how many apologies came only from your side. and perhaps the truth becomes impossible to ignore. You were not maintaining a relationship. You were maintaining hope. Hope that they would change. Hope that they would finally understand. Hope that one day they would love you the way you loved them. But hope can become dangerous when it keeps you attached to people who are attached only to your effort, because some individuals don't miss you. They miss what you provided. They miss the attention. They miss the validation. They miss knowing someone was always available. And when that availability disappears, they feel something they haven't experienced in a long time: emptiness. At first, they may attempt subtle approaches, a random message, an unexpected like, a casual conversation. Not because they suddenly transformed overnight, but because human beings naturally seek to restore what they once considered secure. This is where many people make a mistake. The moment they receive attention again, they confuse it with change. But attention and transformation are not the same thing. Someone can miss your presence without changing their character. Someone can fear losing you without learning how to value you. Someone can return without becoming different. And this is why awareness matters. Because when people feel panic, they often promise things they are not prepared to maintain. Fear creates temporary effort, but only maturity creates lasting change. And maturity is revealed through actions, not words. Because words are easy, promises are easy, regret is easy, consistency is rare. And this is why silence becomes so powerful. Not because silence manipulates, but because silence reveals. Without constant explanations, people expose their intentions. Without endless forgiveness, they reveal their priorities. Without your energy carrying everything, truth finally comes to the surface, and truth can be uncomfortable, because sometimes the person you miss is not the person they truly are. Sometimes you are grieving potential. Sometimes you are mourning the version of them you hoped they would become. And hope can be seductive. Hope whispers, "Maybe next time." Hope says, "They didn't mean it." Hope says, "Be patient." But reality asks a different question. How many times must someone show you who they are before you believe them? This question changes lives, because many people are trapped not by love, but by memories, not by reality, but by possibilities. They hold on to the first version of someone they met. They cling to the beautiful beginning, and they ignore the painful present. But life is not lived in memories. Life is lived in patterns. And patterns reveal character. Anyone can be loving when everything is easy. Anyone can make promises in beautiful moments. But true character reveals itself during ordinary days, during conflicts, during misunderstandings, during periods when love requires effort. And this is where many relationships quietly collapse, because feelings create attraction, but character creates stability. And no amount of chemistry can replace emotional maturity. Perhaps you know this feeling. You remember the good moments. You replay the laughter. You remember the dreams you built together. And a part of you wonders whether you gave up too soon. But ask yourself something. Did you truly give up? Or did you simply stop abandoning yourself? Because there is a difference. Walking away from disrespect is not failure. Protecting your peace is not selfishness. Refusing to beg for love is not arrogance. It is self-respect. And self-respect changes people, not only you, but those around you. Because the moment you stop accepting less, everyone who benefited from your lack of boundaries begins to react. Some become angry. Some become confused. Some attempt guilt. Some try to make you feel responsible for their discomfort. And this is fascinating, because people rarely complain when you sacrifice yourself, but the moment you prioritize yourself, they suddenly accuse you of changing. And perhaps they are right. You have changed. You are no longer willing to lose yourself to keep others comfortable. You are no longer willing to prove your worth. You are no longer willing to earn what should be freely given. And this transformation creates a powerful effect. The people who truly love you adapt. The people who merely used your kindness resist, because genuine love respects boundaries. Manipulation resents them, and sooner or later everyone's intentions become visible. Carl Jung once observed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. How many people call repeated heartbreak fate? How many call emotional exhaustion bad luck? How many blame destiny while repeating the same patterns? But perhaps it isn't fate at all. Perhaps it is familiarity. Perhaps you were unconsciously attracted to relationships where you had to earn affection. Perhaps you learned to associate struggle with love. Perhaps being needed felt more comfortable than being valued. And if that is true, then this moment is bigger than one person. This moment is about breaking patterns that have followed you for years. Because healing is not just about moving on from someone. Healing is about understanding why you stayed so long, why you ignored your intuition, why you settled for breadcrumbs when your heart desired something real. And these answers are not always easy, because sometimes they lead you back to childhood, back to experiences that taught you love must be earned, back to wounds that convinced you that being chosen required suffering. But the truth is different. Real love does not demand that you disappear. Real love does not reward anxiety. Real love does not make you question your worth every day. And once you experience peace, chaos stops feeling exciting. Once you experience consistency, confusion stops feeling romantic. Once you experience emotional safety, games become exhausting, and something unexpected begins to happen. You start attracting different people. Not because the world changed, but because you changed. Because what you tolerate determines what remains in your life, and what you reject creates space for something better. Which brings us to something few people talk about. The moment when the person you stopped chasing finally realizes you are truly gone. Because there comes a point when curiosity becomes fear, and fear becomes regret. And what they do next often reveals everything. There comes a moment that many people never see coming. A moment when the person who once felt completely certain of your presence suddenly realizes that your silence is not temporary. At first, they thought you needed space. Then they thought you were angry. Then they convinced themselves you would eventually return. But weeks pass, months pass, and something begins to trouble them. You no longer react. You no longer chase. You no longer fight to stay in their life. And for the first time, they are forced to experience something you carried for far too long. Uncertainty, because certainty is comforting. And human beings rarely appreciate comfort until it disappears. Suddenly, they begin revisiting old conversations. They remember your kindness. They remember the nights you stayed when anyone else would have left. They remember the patience they once considered ordinary. And strangely enough, memories become louder in absence. Because distance has a way of revealing value. Things that seemed insignificant become precious. Things that felt guaranteed become irreplaceable. And this is where regret begins. Not with dramatic tears, not with grand speeches, but with small moments, a song that reminds them of you, a place you once visited together, a memory that unexpectedly appears when they are alone, because memories are powerful and loneliness amplifies them. The truth is, people often don't realize how deeply someone loved them until they encounter a world that offers less, until they meet people who are not as patient, until they discover that loyalty is rare, until they understand that genuine care cannot be replaced as easily as they once imagined. And perhaps this is one of life's greatest ironies. People spend years searching for extraordinary things while overlooking extraordinary people. Then one day they wake up and realize that what they were searching for had been standing beside them all along. But realization and redemption are not always the same, because awareness does not guarantee change. Regret does not automatically create maturity. Missing someone does not mean understanding them. And this is why many people return with emotions but without transformation. They come back because they feel lonely. They come back because life humbled them. They come back because they finally understand your worth. But understanding your worth and deserving your presence are two different things, because some lessons arrive too late. And perhaps this sounds painful, but sometimes the greatest gift life gives you is delayed understanding. Because if they had realized your value earlier, you might never have discovered your own. You might have continued sacrificing yourself. You might have continued settling. You might have continued believing that love meant suffering, but losing them forced you to find yourself. And sometimes losing what you wanted leads you toward what you needed. That is why growth rarely feels beautiful in the beginning. Growth feels lonely. Growth feels confusing. Growth feels unfair. Because transformation often begins with disappointment, not success, not celebration. Disappointment. The kind of disappointment that breaks illusions. The kind that forces you to confront truths you spent years avoiding. And perhaps the hardest truth of all is this: not everyone you love is meant to stay. Some people enter your life to teach you. Some reveal your wounds. Some expose your insecurities. And some arrive simply to show you what you must never accept again. But human beings resist endings, because endings feel like failure. We cling to what is familiar, even when familiarity hurts us, even when we know deep down that something has already died. Because letting go means accepting reality, and reality can be painful. It means accepting that effort cannot force love. It means accepting that loyalty cannot change someone who does not wish to change. It means accepting that no amount of sacrifice can make another person appreciate what they are determined to overlook. And acceptance is difficult because the ego always wants another chance, another explanation, another conversation, another possibility. But peace begins where obsession ends. Peace begins when you stop trying to control outcomes. Peace begins when you understand that your value does not increase because someone finally notices it. Diamonds remain valuable even when buried underground. The sun remains powerful even when hidden behind clouds. And your worth does not depend on another person's recognition. It never did. The tragedy is that many people spend their lives waiting for validation from those who are incapable of giving it. They wait for apologies that never come. They wait for closure that never arrives. They wait for understanding from people who refuse to understand themselves. And in that waiting, years disappear, dreams disappear, opportunities disappear. But life does not stop, and perhaps that is the most beautiful truth of all. Life continues. The chapter ends, but the story does not. The heartbreak ends, but your existence does not. The rejection ends, but your potential remains untouched. And one day, something unexpected happens. You wake up, and they are no longer the first thought in your mind. Their absence no longer feels unbearable. Their name no longer controls your emotions. And what once felt impossible suddenly becomes reality. You are free. Not because you stopped loving, but because you stopped suffering. Not because you erased the memories, but because the memories no longer define you. And that freedom changes everything. Because now, instead of chasing people, you chase purpose. Instead of seeking approval, you seek peace. Instead of fearing loneliness, you begin enjoying your own company. And that is when life starts opening doors you never noticed before. New opportunities, new experiences, new connections, new versions of yourself. because the energy once wasted on anxiety becomes available for growth. And perhaps this is what so many people misunderstand. They think healing means forgetting. But healing is not forgetting. Healing is remembering without breaking. Healing is being able to look back without wanting to go back. Healing is carrying wisdom instead of wounds. And when you reach that place, something fascinating happens. The person who once occupied your mind every day becomes just another chapter. Not your destiny, not your identity, just a chapter. And chapters are meant to end so that new ones can begin. Which leads us to the greatest surprise of all. Because while one person is finally realizing what they lost, you are quietly stepping into the most powerful stage of your life. A stage no one saw coming, including you. And once this transformation begins, everything changes, because the version of you that emerges after pain is often stronger than the version that existed before it. And that is where the real story begins, because what happens next may become the greatest chapter you have ever lived. So I want to leave you with a question. Have you ever experienced the moment when you stopped chasing someone, and only then did they realize your true value? Share your experience in the comments below, because your story may be the reminder someone else desperately needs today.